In the lobby of a luxurious hotel, a millionaire walks toward the meeting that could change his career. But he is stopped by a 7-year-old girl who, with a serious look, warns him in Russian about a scam. Suspicious, he follows his intuition and avoids a trap that would have destroyed his company. If this beautiful story of love and perseverance touched you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us from which city you're watching us. The rising sun illuminated the glass skyscrapers of Wall Street in the financial heart of New York City. Raphael Davies adjusted his navy blue tie as he watched the city awaken from his penthouse apartment. At 42, he commanded Artec, one of the most promising technology companies in the country. That morning, his agenda indicated what could be the biggest deal of his career, a meeting with foreign investors interested in expanding the company into international markets. "Sir, coffee is served," announced Mrs. Elsie, the housekeeper, who had looked after his apartment for over a decade. "And don't forget your doctor's appointment next week." The doctor called to confirm. Raphael nodded without real interest. His mind was already navigating figures and growth projections. He picked up his Italian leather briefcase, a gift from his father before he retired, and checked for the last time the contracts meticulously reviewed by his legal team. Everything seemed perfect. $50 million in direct investment. Artec would finally reach Europe. "Thank you, Elsie. I'll be back late today." "You don't need to wait for me." The housekeeper frowned as she did every morning upon hearing the same reply. "You should eat properly, sir. It's not healthy to live on just coffee and meetings." Raphael smiled, but the gesture didn't reach his eyes. He picked up his briefcase, car keys, and descended by private elevator to the garage. In 20 minutes, he would be at the Grand Central Hotel where the investors awaited him. New York traffic was cooperating that morning, a rare occurrence that Raphael interpreted as a good omen. On the way, he mentally reviewed the key points of the presentation. Artec had started 6 years ago as a small financial management software startup. Today, its programs were used by over 200 medium and large companies in the United States. International expansion was the next logical step, and the Russian investors seemed especially interested in taking the technology to Eastern Europe. When he arrived at the hotel lobby, one of the city's most luxurious, Raphael took a deep breath, sensing the subtle scent of wood and lavender that characterized the ambience. The venue was frequently chosen for high-level meetings and for accommodating international executives. Italian marble on the floor, Czech crystal chandeliers on the ceiling, designer furniture, everything exuded exclusivity. As he walked towards the elevators, Raphael barely noticed the little girl sitting alone on one of the red sofas in the lobby. She was approximately 7 years old, with curly hair tied in 2 pigtails, light brown skin, and wore a simple but clean and well-pressed dress. In her hands, a coloring book and some scattered pencils. Despite the drawing materials, her attentive eyes were fixed on the panoramic elevator, as if studying every person who entered and exited. Raphael checked his watch. He still had 10 minutes before the meeting. He pressed the elevator button and waited, mentally reviewing once more the numbers he would present. It was then that he felt a slight tug on the sleeve of his Italian suit jacket. "Mister, are you going up to the 10th floor?" The childish voice caught him by surprise. The girl from the sofa was now beside him, looking at him with a seriousness disconcerting for someone so young. Raphael frowned, trying to understand how she knew his destination. "Yes, I am. Why?" The girl looked around, making sure no one was paying attention to their conversation, and spoke in a low voice. "You shouldn't go." "Those men are not good." Raphael blinked a few times, confused. "What do you mean?" "I heard them talking. My grandma taught me Russian. They were laughing, saying they were going to trick the rich American today. That the papers you're going to sign have a hidden thing." The elevator arrived with a soft chime. The doors opened invitingly. Raphael hesitated. "Little girl, are you sure about this? That's a serious accusation." She nodded with conviction. "Yes, I am. One of them said that by the time you realize what happened, it will be too late." They laughed a lot. A uniformed woman approached in a hurry. "Beatrice, what did I tell you about bothering guests?" She turned to Raphael with an apologetic look. "I'm sorry, sir. My daughter is waiting to go to school. I promise she won't bother you again." Raphael looked at the woman. She must have been just over 30, wearing the hotel uniform with a badge that read, "Julia Smith, Housekeeping." She gently pulled her daughter by the arm. "She's not bothering me," Raphael replied. Something in the girl's urgency made him hesitate. It was absurd to trust a child's warning. But there was something in her gaze, an unusual wisdom, a genuine concern. "What's your full name?" he asked the girl. "Beatrice Smith, but everyone calls me B." "Well, B, thank you for the warning." The elevator doors began to close. On an impulse he didn't even understand, Raphael took a step back, letting the elevator ascend without him. Julia seemed mortified by the situation. "Sir, I apologize profoundly. B has a very fertile imagination and sometimes—" "It's all right," Raphael interrupted. "Actually, I forgot something important in my car. I'll need to postpone my meeting." He stepped away a few paces and took out his cell phone. He called his lawyer, Marcus, who was already on the 10th floor waiting for the meeting. "Marcus, don't sign anything." "I repeat, do not sign anything at all." "I'm canceling the meeting." "What?" "Raphael, you're on your way, right? They're already here and—" "Apologize, say I had an emergency." "Invent anything, but don't sign anything, and don't make any promises. I'll explain later." Raphael hung up and discreetly observed the lobby. Near the reception he saw 3 men in suits, conversing in low voices. Slavs, no doubt. One of them was on the phone with an irritated expression. He sat in an armchair from where he could observe the situation without being easily noticed. His heart was pounding. Part of him said he was being ridiculous, throwing away the opportunity of a lifetime because of a child's comment. Another part, however, reminded him that in business instinct was something to be respected. He picked up the phone again and called a friend who worked for the FBI. "Paul, it's Raphael. I need an urgent favor. Can you check if there's any investigation involving Russian investors in New York City? Specifically at the Grand Central Hotel." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Raphael, how did you know about this?" A shiver ran down his spine. "So there really is something?" "I can't say much over the phone. But stay away from them, got it? We're monitoring a group suspected of defrauding American businessmen with fake international contracts. The scheme is sophisticated." Raphael swallowed hard, looking at the girl who was now back to coloring her notebook as if nothing had happened. How did she know? How had a 7-year-old child noticed something that he, with all his experience, hadn't? "Thanks, Paul, I owe you one." He hung up and remained seated, watching. Less than 20 minutes later, 4 men in discreet suits entered the hotel, identified themselves at the reception, and went upstairs. FBI agents for sure. The Russians in the lobby seemed to notice the movement and quickly headed for the exit, but were intercepted by more agents who entered through another door. The operation was quick and discreet, exactly as FBI actions usually were in high-end areas to avoid alarming other guests. The men were escorted out without handcuffs but clearly in custody. Raphael felt stunned. The meeting he would have just now on the 10th floor was a trap. The documents, which his legal team had reviewed and approved, probably contained hidden clauses or technical terms with double interpretations that would only be perceived when it was too late. A sophisticated international scam, of which he would have been a victim if not for Beatrice's warning. When the lobby returned to normal, he approached the sofa where the girl continued drawing, seemingly oblivious to the commotion that had occurred. "B," he called softly. She raised her large, expressive eyes. "You just saved me from a lot of trouble." "How can I thank you?" The girl shrugged. "You don't have to, mister. My grandma always says we should help when we can." Julia, who had been watching the scene from afar, approached nervously. "So what did my daughter do? Is she causing problems?" "I promise it won't happen again. Raphael raised his hand in a reassuring gesture. "For your daughter just saved me from enormous losses. The men I was going to meet were fraudsters. She overheard their conversation in Russian and warned me." Julia looked at her daughter, surprised. "B, you understood what those men were saying?" "Why didn't you tell me?" "I tried to tell you, Mum, but you were busy with the problem in room 507 and said we'd talk later." Raphael watched the interaction between mother and daughter with growing interest. There was something special about that girl. A perception, an intelligence that didn't match her 7 years. "Does your daughter speak Russian?" he asked Julia. The woman sighed. "My ex-husband's mother is Russian. She always spoke to B in Russian since she was a baby." "My daughter has a knack for languages." Actually, for almost everything involving learning. There was a mixture of pride and concern in her voice. Sometimes I think she's too smart for her own age. Raphael nodded thoughtfully. I see. Well, I'd really like to thank you properly. Can we talk in private for a moment? Julia seemed hesitant. Sir, I appreciate the kindness, but I'm on duty and I'll speak to your supervisor. This is important. 15 minutes later, in a small meeting room on the mezzanine, Raphael, Julia, and B were seated. Raphael had briefly explained the situation to the hotel manager, who not only excused Julia for the conversation, but seemed relieved that a potential scandal had been averted at the establishment. So, how long have you worked in hotel housekeeping? Raphael asked. 5 years, sir. I started as a chambermaid, was promoted to floor supervisor last year. And B, does she always wait here to go to school? Julia fidgeted with her hands, nervous. Only when I need to come in early and school hasn't opened yet. Normally my neighbor looks after her, but she's traveling this week. I don't have close family in New York City and her father. Well, he's not present. Raphael noticed the woman's discomfort. I'm not judging. On the contrary. I'm impressed with your daughter and curious about her education. B goes to a public school. It's good by public standards, but Julia hesitated. She's bored there. The teachers say she learns much faster than the other children. They suggested a specialized school, but she shrugged, not completing the sentence. It wasn't necessary. A single mother, working as a housekeeping supervisor, could never afford a high-level private school. Raphael looked at B, who was watching the conversation attentively. There was nothing childish in her gaze. B, besides Russian, what other languages do you speak? Portuguese, English, and a little bit of Spanish, she answered without hesitation. I'm learning Spanish from YouTube videos. It's easier than Russian. Raphael couldn't help but smile. And what do you like about school? Math and science. But the teacher only gives easy problems. I already know how to multiply and divide big numbers, but the others are still learning to add. Julia cleared her throat, looking embarrassed. Faye, it's not polite to talk like that. It's all right, Raphael assured her. I admire her honesty. He thought for a moment before continuing. Julia, what would you say if I offered to pay for a better school for B? A school that can really develop her potential. Julia's eyes widened. Sir, Raphael, you can call me Raphael. Raphael, that's very generous, but I can't accept. We don't even know each other, and consider it a thank you. Your investment in your daughter's education has already shown results. She saved my company today. I imagine that with the right opportunities, she can do even more impressive things in the future. Julia bit her lip, undecided. It's too kind, but... Mom, B interrupted. I want to go to a new school. At my school, the other kids think I'm weird. The comment, made with the child's characteristic frankness, caused a momentary silence. Raphael noticed the pain in Julia's eyes, that mother's pain of knowing her child is suffering and not being able to solve the situation. Can I think about it? Julia finally asked. Raphael smiled. Of course. No pressure. He took a business card from his pocket and handed it to her. My direct contact is here. Think carefully and call me, regardless of your answer. As they said goodbye, B looked directly into Raphael's eyes. Thank you for believing in me, Uncle Raphael. Most adults don't believe children when they say important things. That phrase, spoken with such maturity, touched something within him. As he walked back to his car, Raphael reflected on how his life could have taken a catastrophic turn that day. For years he had built Artec, dedicating himself exclusively to work, sacrificing personal relationships for professional success, and everything could have been lost, if not for a 7-year-old girl sitting on a red sofa. On his way back to the office, he called his lawyer, Marcus, who was still stunned by the police operation he had witnessed. They needed to review all documents, understand how they had been fooled by such sophisticated fraudsters, and strengthen corporate security. There was a lot of work to do, but for the first time in years, Raphael's mind was not entirely focused on work. A part of his thoughts remained at that hotel, with the serious-eyed girl and the single mother who was doing the best she could with the available resources. He knew that story. It was, in a way, his own story. He had grown up with a mother who worked as a day laborer, struggling to give her only son the best possible education, believing that this would be his passport to a better life. And it had been. Now it seemed fate had given him a chance to give back. To be for Beatrice what some dedicated teachers had been for him in the past, the bridge to a future of possibilities. The idea brought a strange sensation, a type of satisfaction different from what he felt when closing big deals or seeing Artec's stock value rise. When he arrived at the parking lot of his office building, Raphael realized he was smiling to himself. Something told him that this unexpected encounter would change not only Beatrice's destiny, but also his own. 3 days passed without news from Julia or Beatrice. Raphael immersed himself in work, trying to understand how his company had almost fallen into such a sophisticated trap. The FBI operation had dismantled an international scheme that had already victimized other American businessmen. The contracts, seemingly impeccable, contained technical clauses that, if signed, would give the fraudsters control over Artec's intellectual property and access to offshore corporate bank accounts. "You were very lucky," commented Paul, his FBI friend, during a coffee on Thursday afternoon. "If you had signed those papers, you would have lost control of the company in less than a month." Raphael twirled his coffee cup between his fingers, thoughtful. "It wasn't luck. It was a 7-year-old girl who understood Russian." Paul chuckled, incredulity plastered on his face. "I still can't believe that story. A child saved the Davies empire. The thing is, she could do so much more if she had the right opportunities." Raphael hesitated before continuing. "Do you think it's strange that I want to help her? Offer to pay for her studies?" The officer shrugged. "It would be strange if you didn't want to give back in some way," but he took a sip of coffee. "Just be careful not to create exaggerated expectations. You're not the type to start things and leave them unfinished, but a child's education is a years-long commitment." Paul's words echoed in his mind as he drove back to the office. Raphael was not known for maintaining lasting relationships, neither professional nor personal. His last girlfriend had ended their relationship precisely for that reason, for his almost obsessive dedication to work and his inability to establish deep emotional connections. "You treat people like temporary projects," she had said before walking out the door of his penthouse 6 months ago. Was he doing the same with Beatrice and Julia? A momentary altruistic impulse that would soon be forgotten when the next big deal arose. He didn't have time to delve into that reflection. Upon arriving at the office, his secretary intercepted him in the hallway. "Mr. Davies, a woman is waiting to see you. She said you asked her to get in touch." "Julia Smith." Raphael stopped, surprised. "She's here now?" "Yes, at reception. She's with a little girl. Should I ask them to schedule for another day? You have the video conference with the Canadian investors in—" "Cancel the video conference," Raphael interrupted. "Say I had an emergency. Reschedule for tomorrow." The secretary blinked a few times, processing the unusual instruction. In 6 years of working for Raphael, she had rarely seen him cancel meetings, especially on such short notice. "Yes, sir. Shall I bring Ms. Smith to your office?" Raphael thought for a moment. The formal meeting room would probably make Julia uncomfortable, and his personal office was too personal. "No. Take them to the employee lounge. And please have some snacks and juices brought in. The little girl would probably like something sweet." Minutes later, Raphael entered Artec's employee lounge. A comfortable space with sofas, coffee machines, a small kitchen, and a ping-pong table. Part of the benefits he offered to attract and retain talent. Julia was sitting in one of the armchairs, clearly uncomfortable, while Bea explored the room with curious eyes. "This place is amazing," the girl exclaimed upon seeing him. "Do people actually work here?" Raphael smiled. "Yes, they do. And sometimes they rest here too, play ping-pong, chat. At the company where my dad worked, there was nothing like this," Bea commented with a child's frankness. "It was a sad place with lots of desks close together." Julia adjusted herself in the armchair, visibly embarrassed. "Bea, remember what we talked about talking too much?" Raphael made a reassuring gesture. "It's all right. I love her honesty." He sat opposite the two. "I'm glad you came. I hope it wasn't difficult to find the address." "Actually," Julia seemed to choose her words carefully, "I looked you up. And your company." She clutched a simple but well-kept purse with unnecessary force. "Before considering your offer, I needed to know who we were dealing with." Raphael nodded, respecting her prudence. "And what did you find?" "That you built a financial technology company from scratch. That you're considered one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the country." And that she hesitated as if unsure whether to continue. And that, Raphael encouraged, that you grew up in Harlem, Julia completed. That your mother worked as a day laborer, and that you studied on scholarship at private schools. That you were the first in your family to go to university. Raphael smiled, surprised by the level of research she had done. I see you did your homework. Yes, all of that is true. That's why I'm here, Julia said now with more firmness in her voice, because I understand your gesture. You want to give B the same opportunities you had. Exactly, Raphael observed B, who was now flipping through a technology magazine with genuine interest. Her potential is evident, and I know from personal experience how frustrating it is to be in an environment that doesn't challenge your ability to learn. An employee entered with a tray of juices, coffee, and small sandwiches and sweets. B's eyes lit up at the sight of the chocolate truffles. May I, Mum? Just one, B. You've already had sweets today. Raphael observed the interaction, impressed by the respect the girl showed for maternal authority, despite her evident independence in other aspects. So, he said when they were alone again, have you thought about my proposal? Julia took a deep breath. I thought a lot. And I talked to B too. We would like to accept your help. She raised a hand as if anticipating Raphael's reaction. But with one condition. What is it? I don't just want someone sending money for a school. If you're going to be part of my daughter's education, you need to really get involved. Participate in parent-teacher meetings, monitor her development, be present. Julia looked him directly in the eyes. B doesn't just need financial resources. She needs guidance, someone who understands her potential and helps direct it. The condition caught Raphael by surprise. He expected something related to value limits, to the type of school, perhaps even fear of excessive involvement. But Julia was asking for the exact opposite, a personal commitment, something that would require time and emotional dedication. Why? He asked sincerely. Why not just accept the money and keep your distance? It would be simpler, because I've seen what happens when gifted children receive only resources without proper guidance. B's pediatrician already talked about this. They feel isolated, misunderstood. They can develop emotional problems, anxiety. Julia looked at her daughter, who was now drawing something on a notepad she had found. And because I work full-time, I can't be at all meetings, help with all special projects, provide all the educational experiences she deserves. Raphael considered the implications. He was committing not only to the costs of Beatrice's education, but to active participation in her upbringing. For years, potentially. It was a level of commitment he hadn't even undertaken in his romantic relationships. What if I fail? He asked, verbalizing his greatest fear. Julia seemed surprised by the honesty of the question. Then we will have tried, and B will be better off than she is now. Raphael looked at the girl, who was now observing the adult's conversation with attentive, intelligent eyes. What do you think, B? Do you want me to help with your school? Yes, she answered without hesitation, but Mom said you're very busy. That maybe you can't visit me all the time. Her answer, so direct, caused a pang in Raphael's chest. How much disappointment had that child already experienced to speak like that, with such maturity about adult absences? I am busy, Raphael admitted, but I can reorganize some things. An idea began to form in his mind. Actually, how about we start looking for schools together? This weekend, perhaps? We can visit some of the best institutions in the city, see which one would be most suitable for you. B's face lit up. Can we go to that school with a science lab? I saw on their website that students do real experiments. Raphael laughed. Yes, we can include it on the list. Julia seemed less enthusiastic. These schools have rigorous selection processes. It's not just a matter of being able to pay. Leave that to me, Raphael assured her. I have some contacts, and when they see B's potential, I'm sure they'll want her as a student. The three spent the next hour discussing possibilities. Raphael showed them on the computer some of New York City's most reputable educational institutions, explaining the differences between their pedagogical approaches. He was surprised by B's insightful questions about teaching methods and curricula, questions many adults wouldn't think to ask. They agreed to meet on Saturday morning to visit 3 pre-selected schools. As Julia and B were leaving, the girl approached and, to Raphael's surprise, gave him a spontaneous hug. Thank you, Uncle Raphael. No one has ever cared so much about my school before. The gesture, so simple and pure, provoked an unexpected emotion in Raphael. It had been years since he had received such a sincere hug, without ulterior motives. The pleasure is mine. B, he replied, his voice slightly choked. After they left, Raphael remained seated in the lounge, contemplating what had just happened. He had committed to something that would go far beyond simply writing checks. He was taking on a role in a child's life, a responsibility he couldn't abandon when it became inconvenient. His cell phone rang, bringing him back to reality. It was one of the company's directors, needing to urgently discuss a technical matter. Raphael took a deep breath and returned to executive mode, efficient and focused. But something had changed. A small part of his mind remained with Bea and her mother, planning the future. On Saturday at 9 a.m., Raphael parked his car in front of the modest building where Julia and Bea lived, in the Bronx, New York City. The contrast with his luxury penthouse on Wall Street was evident, but the building, though simple, was well maintained, with plants at the entrance and recent paint. Typical of the lower middle class striving to maintain dignity despite limited resources. He rang the intercom and was greeted by Bea's excited voice. "It's Uncle Raphael!" "Mom, he's here." Minutes later, the two came down. Bea wore a blue dress with white flowers and a headband in her hair. She seemed to have dressed with special care for the occasion. Julia, for her part, wore jeans and a simple but elegant white blouse. Without her hotel uniform, she looked younger and more relaxed. "Good morning," Raphael greeted, smiling. "Ready for our educational marathon?" Bea nodded enthusiastically. "Super ready. I researched more about the schools yesterday. The second one on our list has an amazing robotics program." Raphael exchanged an amused glance with Julia. "I see someone did her homework." "She barely slept from excitement," Julia confided as they headed for the car. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I've never seen her so excited about something. Thank you for this." The three schools they visited that morning were among the most prestigious in New York City. At each one, they were received by principals or pedagogical coordinators who clearly knew Raphael Davies's reputation. They showed science labs, art studios, sports courts, and classrooms equipped with the latest educational technology. At the second school, specializing in innovative methodologies, the coordinator suggested that Bea participate in an activity with other children who were visiting that day. As the girl naturally integrated into the group, Raphael and Julia observed from afar. "She's impressive," the coordinator commented after a few minutes. "She has a verbal articulation capacity and a logical reasoning far above average for her age." "Bea has always been like that," Julia said, with a mixture of pride and concern. "Sometimes it's hard to keep up with her. I understand your concern, Ms. Smith. Highly gifted children need constant and appropriate stimulation. Otherwise, they can become bored, disinterested, and even develop behavioral problems." While the coordinator explained the specific programs for gifted children, Raphael observed Julia. There was something in the way she listened, attentive to every detail, asking pertinent questions, that demonstrated an absolute commitment to her daughter's well-being. That woman had raised an exceptional child alone, working in a hotel, and likely facing countless difficulties along the way. "How did you do it?" Raphael asked during lunch, after visiting the third school. They were in a comfortable restaurant, not excessively luxurious, but certainly more sophisticated than the places Julia and Bea usually frequented. Bea had gone to the restroom, leaving the adults alone for a few minutes. "Did what?" Julia seemed confused. "Raised such an extraordinary daughter, working full-time without her father's support. And yet Bea is amazing." Julia smiled, a tired but genuine smile. "It wasn't easy. There were days I thought I couldn't handle it, but—" She shrugged. "You do what you need to do for your child. And I had some help along the way. My neighbor, Mrs. Zola, always looked after Bea when I needed to work overtime. The health clinic pediatrician, who identified early on that she had special abilities and guided me. The director of her current school, who, despite limitations, always tried to give her extra attention." Raphael nodded, feeling a growing admiration for that woman. "Still, it's impressive." "And you?" Julia asked, turning the conversation. "How did you manage to get out of Harlem and build all this?" "It must have been equally difficult." The question caught Raphael off guard. Few people were interested in his personal story. Most were more interested in the successful businessman of the present than the poor boy of the past. I also had help, he admitted. Teachers who believed in me, a full scholarship in high school. I worked as an intern in technology companies since I was 16 to help at home. And my mother, he smiled at the memory. She never doubted that I would go far, even when I doubted myself. She must be very proud of you now. Raphael's smile disappeared. She passed away 3 years ago, cancer. Julia instinctively reached out, touching his hand across the table. I'm so sorry. The touch, brief and comforting, brought a strange sense of comfort. It had been a long time since Raphael had spoken about his mother, about the loss that still hurt despite the time. B returned, interrupting the moment. What are you talking about? We were deciding which school you prefer, Raphael quickly replied, regaining his composure. The girl's eyes sparkled. I loved the second one, the one with the robotics program and the chemistry lab. The kids there seemed really happy, not bored like at my current school. Julia and Raphael exchanged glances. I liked it a lot too, Julia agreed. But the selective process, leave that to me, Raphael assured her. I'll call the principal on Monday and see what we can do. The following week, after a series of phone calls and a substantial donation to the institution's scholarship fund, Raphael managed to secure a special assessment for Bay. The girl took knowledge tests and interviews with educational psychologists, excelling at every stage. The result arrived faster than usual. Beatrice Smith had been accepted and could start the following semester, in August, with a full scholarship. When Raphael broke the news, at Julia's home on a Wednesday night, Bea jumped into his arms, overflowing with joy. Thank you, Uncle Raphael. I promise I'll be the best student in the school. Julia, in turn, had tears in her eyes. I don't know how to thank you, she said softly as her daughter ran to show the acceptance letter to their neighbor. Mrs. Zola. You don't need to thank me, Raphael replied, feeling a satisfaction unlike any other he had experienced in business. This is just the beginning. We still have uniforms to buy, school supplies, maybe some complimentary classes to prepare her for the new environment. Julia stared at him for a moment. Why are you doing this, really? You've already given back more than enough for what Bea did. Raphael reflected on the question. Why was he getting so involved? Why cancel meetings and rearrange his meticulously planned schedule to accompany a child he barely knew? Because, he searched for the right words, because I remember what it's like to be a child with potential, trapped in circumstances that limit that potential. And because, he hesitated before admitting something he had only recently realized, because my life was incomplete, full of professional achievements, but without anything truly significant in the personal sphere. Julia studied him for a moment, as if trying to determine the sincerity of his words. What she saw seemed to satisfy her as she nodded slowly. Well, it seems Bea has gained an educational godfather. Raphael smiled at the term. Educational godfather. I like that. That night, driving back to his penthouse, Raphael reflected on the unexpected turn his life had taken in recent weeks. Since meeting Bea in the hotel lobby, it seemed a door had opened to a different dimension of life. A dimension that involved real human connections, not just business transactions. It was frightening and stimulating at the same time. Upon arriving home, instead of reviewing emails as he normally would, Raphael picked up the phone and called his secretary. Lucy, I need you to block all Tuesday afternoons in my agenda, starting in August. From 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. Any recurring meeting, Mr. Davies. Raphael smiled to himself. Yes, you could say so. A very important meeting. It would be the day he would accompany Bea's extracurricular classes, as they had agreed. A commitment that, for the first time in a long time, had nothing to do with acquisitions, mergers, or market strategies. A commitment to the future of a brilliant child who by chance had saved his company, and perhaps in a way he didn't yet fully understand, was also saving something within him. August arrived with the typical late winter heat of New York City, announcing the proximity of spring. Bea's first day of school at the new institution completely transformed the routine of 3 very different people. Julia had managed to change her shift at the hotel to personally take her daughter. Raphael, defying all his habits, cancelled a meeting with investors to be present at that significant moment. "I'm nervous," B confessed, as the three walked through the impeccable corridors of the Horizons Educational Institute. She wore her new uniform, navy blue pants and a white shirt with the school logo, and carried a backpack that seemed too big for her small frame. Raphael crouched down to be at her eye level. "You know what my mom used to tell me when I was nervous on the first day of school. That being nervous is just your body getting ready to do something amazing." B smiled, her fear momentarily forgotten. "Your mom was smart." "Very," Raphael agreed, feeling a pang in his chest, remembering Mrs. Conceição, who hadn't lived long enough to see the empire her son had built. Teacher Mariana, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes behind modern glasses, received B with special attention. Raphael observed with satisfaction that the institute truly seemed to value students' individuality. The classroom was organized into small groups, not rows, and there were diverse spaces for different activities. "B will be in our advanced program for some subjects," the teacher explained. "Math and science mainly, according to her initial assessment. In other subjects, she will be with the regular class to ensure proper socialization." Julia nodded, visibly relieved to see that her daughter would be well cared for. When it was time to say goodbye, B hugged her mother tightly. "Everything will be fine, honey," Julia assured her, adjusting the headband in the girl's hair. "I'll be here at dismissal at 4 o'clock. B turned to Raphael, who didn't expect a hug either. When the small arms wrapped around his neck, he felt an unexpected emotion. "Thank you for bringing me here, Uncle Raphael. The credit is all yours. B, you earned this." As they watched the girl follow the teacher into the classroom, Julia discreetly wiped away a tear. "She's never been so happy going to school," she commented. Raphael and Julia walked together to the exit. There was a strange familiarity in that situation, as if they were in some way a family accompanying their daughter on her first day of school. "Were you able to change your shift permanently?" Raphael asked as they headed to the parking lot. "Only partially. I can bring her every morning, but I can only pick her up 3 times a week. On the other days, I rely on the school bus." Raphael noticed the concern in her voice. "I can help with that. I reorganized my schedule to be free on Tuesday afternoons, remember? I can pick her up on those days." Julia stopped, staring at him with an expression difficult to decipher. "Raphael, you're already doing so much. I don't want to take advantage." "It's not taking advantage if I'm offering," he replied simply. "Besides, Tuesdays are science club days. I promised B I'd accompany her activities." A reluctant smile appeared on Julia's face. "She talked about that all weekend. Uncle Raphael is going to see my experiments." I've never seen her so excited about an adult's presence in her life since, she hesitated, since her father. Raphael completed cautiously. Julia nodded. "He left when she was 3, went back to Moscow and practically disappeared. Calls occasionally, sends gifts on birthdays, but he was never really present." Raphael felt a pang of anger at the man who had abandoned a child as special as B. Well, he's missing out on something extraordinary. They reached the point where they needed to go their separate ways, Julia to the subway that would take her to the hotel, Raphael to his office on Wall Street. "Have a good workday," he said, surprising himself with the genuine desire to prolong the conversation. There was something about Julia, a quiet dignity, a calm strength, that aroused his admiration. "You too," she replied. "And thank you again, for everything." Raphael watched her walk away, a small but determined figure in the city crowd. For a moment, he wondered what his life would be like if he had met someone like Julia before, someone with solid values, with purpose beyond professional ambition. He shook his head, pushing the thought away. He was getting too involved, creating fantasies that wouldn't fit into his reality. At Artec, he plunged into work with his usual efficiency. After the failure with the Russian investors, the company was in negotiations with a Canadian group. Genuine people this time, exhaustively vetted. Meetings extended throughout the day, but even concentrated on numbers and projections. Raphael found himself checking his watch, wondering how B's first day at the new school was going. At 5 in the afternoon, when most executives had already finished their workday, his cell phone vibrated with a message from Julia, a photo of B smiling radiantly, holding a drawing she had made in art class. "First day absolute success," read the caption. Raphael smiled at the screen, feeling a satisfaction different from any he had ever experienced when closing big deals. He replied immediately, "I knew she would shine." In the weeks that followed, Raphael surprised his team and himself with subtle changes in his routine. Tuesday afternoons became sacred. No meetings, no international calls, no corporate emergencies could interfere. It was the day he picked Bea up from school, took her to science club, and then for a snack before dropping her off at home. In the first month, these encounters were somewhat formal, with Raphael trying to find the right tone to talk to a 7-year-old. But Bea made everything easier. Her insatiable curiosity, her direct and sincere questions, her capacity to marvel at the world, slowly broke down the barriers Raphael had built around himself over years of corporate ambition. "Why don't you have children, Uncle Raphael?" Bea asked one afternoon, as they had milkshakes at a diner near the school. The question so direct caught him off guard. "Well, I never found the right time, I guess. Or the right person." Bea considered the answer with the seriousness of a little philosopher. "But you would be a good dad. You explain things well. You don't talk to me like I'm stupid, and you always answer my questions." Raphael felt a strange warmth spread in his chest. "Thank you, Bea, that means a lot to me. My mom says you're a very busy and important person, and that it's a miracle you have time for me." "Your mom said that?" Raphael raised his eyebrows, surprised. "Not exactly like that," Bea admitted. "She said you're a very generous man for dedicating your precious time to us." "I thought it was a miracle." Raphael laughed, charmed by her honesty. "It's not a miracle, Bea, it's a choice. And one of the best I've ever made." On the following Tuesdays, a routine was established. Raphael would pick her up at school dismissal. Bea would run to him with enthusiasm, eager to show what she had learned or created that day. They would go to the science club, where the girl excelled among much older children. Afterwards, there was always time for a snack and conversation. In October, the first parent-teacher meeting arrived. Raphael asked Julia if she would mind if he participated too. "Of course not," she replied by phone, sounding genuinely happy with the offer. "Actually, it would be great to have someone with me. These meetings always make me nervous." On the agreed day, Raphael picked Julia up at her apartment. It was a Thursday evening, and she had just arrived from work. She wore a simple but elegant dress and had styled her hair in a way Raphael hadn't seen before. She looked younger, less tired. "You look different," he commented as they drove to the school. Julia smiled, slightly embarrassed. "I tried to dress up a bit. This school is another level. The other parents are also sophisticated." "You look perfect," Raphael replied without thinking, surprising himself with the spontaneous comment. At the meeting, they sat side by side among other couples. The pedagogical coordinator, Dr. Helen, presented the semester's plan and highlighted some students who demonstrated exceptional performance. Beatrice was among them. "Your daughter has extraordinary potential," Dr. Helen commented when Julia and Raphael approached to speak individually. "Especially in science and math. She's already working with 5th grade content in those subjects." Raphael watched pride illuminate Julia's face. "She always loved numbers," her mother commented, "since she was little. We also noticed that she has an impressive aptitude for languages. In addition to the Russian and English she already knew, she's excelling in Spanish classes." "That's her paternal grandmother's influence," Julia explained. "She's Russian and always spoke to Bea in her native language, even from a distance." The coordinator nodded, taking notes. "We have a recommendation for you." She looked at both of them, treating them naturally as a couple. "We'd like to include Beatrice in the school's music program. We noticed in the introductory music activities that she has an excellent ear and rhythmic coordination. It would be a way to balance her logical mathematical development with artistic expression." Raphael and Julia exchanged glances. "Of course," Julia replied. "If you think it will be good for her." "Great." The coordinator smiled, satisfied. "Classes are on Thursdays after regular hours. There's an additional fee, but considering Beatrice's full scholarship, we could include that in the package." Raphael gently intervened. "It won't be necessary. I'll pay for the music lessons separately. The scholarship can be directed to other students who need it." Julia shot him a surprised look, but didn't comment. When they left the coordinator's office, she whispered, "You didn't have to do that. They would have included it in the scholarship package." I know, but it's important to me, Julia. I want to do this. Raphael hesitated before continuing. Besides, who knows? Maybe I can start picking up B on Thursdays too. For music lessons? Julia stopped, staring at him. Raphael, you're already doing so much. Your company, your work, the company is doing well. I have a competent team, and to be honest, I'm enjoying these afternoons with B. They remind me why I started all this, why I worked so hard all these years. And why was that? Julia asked, genuinely curious. Raphael reflected for a moment. Initially, it was to prove I could, to show that a kid from Harlem could make it, you know? Then it became a kind of obsession, to grow, expand, conquer. He paused. But recently I've been wondering, for what, for whom? I don't have family. I barely see my few friends. All the money I've made, what's it for if I can't share it, use it to do something meaningful? Julia listened attentively without interrupting him. There was something in the way she listened, truly listened, that made Raphael feel understood in a way he had rarely experienced. And then B appeared, he continued. And for the first time in years, I felt I was doing something that truly mattered. Something beyond numbers on a spreadsheet or growth charts. I understand that, Julia said softly. When B was born, everything changed for me too. Suddenly it wasn't about me anymore, my dreams, my career. It was about giving her a better life than I had. They left the school and walked to the car, conversing with an ease that surprised them both. On the way back to Julia's apartment, Raphael suggested they stop for dinner. There's a great place nearby. It's nothing too fancy, but the food is excellent. Julia hesitated. B is with Mrs. Zola. I didn't tell her I'd be late. Call her. Tell her we're having dinner to discuss school matters, Raphael suggested. Seeing Julia's hesitation, he added, It's just dinner, Julia. I promise to have you back before midnight, Cinderella. The joke drew a smile from her. All right, but nothing too late. I have to be at the hotel at 7 tomorrow. The restaurant was a small family-run Italian place with checkered tablecloths and candles in empty wine bottles. Nothing ostentatious, but cozy and authentic. Raphael was clearly a regular customer. The owner greeted him by name and led them to the best table. In a quiet corner, I didn't imagine you frequenting a place like this, Julia commented, looking around with approval. Why? Did you expect a Michelin-starred restaurant with tiny dishes and unpronounceable names? Raphael smiled. To be honest, yes. You're Raphael Davies, the tech genius, the businessman who appeared on the covers of business magazines. Raphael waved his hand dismissively. That's the Raphael Davies people expect to see. But I grew up eating in simple places with real food. My mother cooked like that, with soul, no fuss. I never lost my taste for it. They ordered fresh pasta and red wine. The conversation flowed naturally, moving from B's education to stories of their childhoods, professional challenges, old and new dreams. Julia told him about her marriage to Michael. B's father, a Russian exchange student she had met when working as a receptionist at a smaller hotel. It was an intense but quick love, she explained, swirling her wineglass. He never really adapted to the United States. When the opportunity arose to return to Moscow, he didn't think twice. I refused to go. I had my family here, my job. And to be honest, I already realized we weren't compatible long-term. Does he see B often? No, he calls on her birthday at Christmas. Sends expensive gifts as if that compensates for his absence. Julia sighed. His mother, on the other hand, is wonderful. She video calls every week, keeps in touch with B, teaches her Russian, tells her stories. It's thanks to her that B maintains this connection to her paternal culture. Raphael listened with genuine attention. It must have been difficult raising a daughter alone. It was. It is. Julia smiled faintly. But it's also the most rewarding thing I've ever done. B made me a better, stronger person. She paused. And you? Annie almost misses. Davies on the horizon? Raphael laughed, but there was a melancholy in his gaze. There have been a few candidates over the years, but I always ended up putting work first. My last relationship ended almost a year ago. She said I was emotionally unavailable. And were you? The direct question made Raphael reflect. Probably so. I invested so much in my career, in building my empire, that I forgot to build a life outside of that. It's never too late, Julia offered softly, something in her tone, in the way the candlelight reflected in her eyes, made Raphael's heart race in a way it hadn't in a long time. He felt the impulse to reach for her hand across the table, but restrained himself. The last thing he wanted was to complicate his relationship with Bee's mother. Dinner extended for almost 3 hours, much longer than Julia had planned. When they realized the time, it was already past 11. "My goodness, I need to go." "Mrs. Zola must be exhausted," Julia exclaimed, checking her watch. Raphael paid the bill quickly and drove back to her apartment. On the way, a comfortable silence settled between them, the kind of silence that only exists when two people feel truly at ease with each other. Upon arriving at the building, Raphael insisted on accompanying her to the door. In the 5th-floor hallway, Julia turned to thank him for the evening. They were close, closer than they had been before. Raphael could smell her soft perfume, see the small freckles that dotted her nose. "Thank you for dinner. And for everything you've done for Bee," she said softly. "The pleasure is mine, truly." There was a moment, a brief moment, when both seemed to hesitate, as if something was about to happen. Then the neighbor's apartment door opened and Mrs. Zola appeared, bringing a sleepy Bee by the hand. "Oh, finally." "I was starting to worry," the elderly lady said, observing the two adults with curious interest. "Sorry for the delay. Mrs. Zola, we ended up extending our conversation about school," Julia explained, blushing slightly. Bee, still half asleep, smiled upon seeing Raphael. "Uncle Raphael, did you come to visit me?" "I came to bring your mom home," he explained, crouching down to be at the girl's height. "How was your day at school?" "Good. The teacher said my science project might go to the state fair." "That's amazing, Bee. I'm so proud." The word proud came out naturally, as if he truly had the right to feel paternal pride for the girl. Raphael realized what he had said and shot a quick glance at Julia, fearing he had crossed some invisible line. But she just smiled, a smile that lit up her entire face. "Well, it's late. I better go," Raphael said, standing up. "Tomorrow I have a video conference with the Canadians first thing." Julia nodded. "Of course. Thank you again. See you next Tuesday, Uncle Raphael," Bee asked hopefully. "See you Tuesday," he confirmed. "And maybe Thursdays too, for music lessons." "I'll talk to your mum about that." He said goodbye with a wave and walked to the elevator. As the doors closed, he saw Julia hug Bee by the shoulders and lead her daughter into the apartment. That image, mother and daughter, the small family unit, stirred a strange feeling in him, a mixture of admiration, affection, and something more, something he couldn't, or perhaps feared to, name. Back in his luxurious and empty penthouse, Raphael opened a bottle of expensive whiskey and poured himself a shot. Sitting alone on the balcony, watching the illuminated city, he reflected on the promises and commitments he had made in recent weeks. Commitments to a brilliant child who had shown him the vulnerability of his empire. Commitments to a dedicated mother who fought daily to give her daughter the best. And perhaps more importantly, silent promises he had made to himself. To be present, to be reliable, not to disappoint that small family that, inexplicably, was beginning to fill a void in his life that he didn't even know existed. He picked up his phone and sent a message to Julia. "Thank you for tonight. It was special. Can we talk tomorrow about Bee's music lessons?" The reply came almost immediately. "Thank you too. It was truly special." "Yes, we can. Good night, Raphael." It was the first time she had called him by his first name only, without formalities. A small detail, but one that made Raphael smile in the dark of his balcony, with a sense of possibilities he hadn't experienced in a long time. The months that followed established a routine that, gradually, transformed into a new normality for Raphael, Julia, and Bee. Tuesdays continued to be Science Club Day, when Raphael picked Bee up from school, and they spent the afternoon between experiments and conversations. Now on Thursdays, he also accompanied her to music lessons, where the girl revealed a natural talent for the piano. Little by little, their meetings extended beyond school activities. A Saturday at Central Park, a Sunday at the Discovery Museum, a holiday at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. Raphael found himself constantly surprised by how much he appreciated these simple moments, cycling with Bee along the park's tree-lined paths, observing her face lit up with curiosity before scientific experiments at the museum, listening to her incessant questions about every exotic plant at the Botanic Garden. And there was Julia, Initially hesitant, she had begun to accept Raphael's presence in their lives more easily. Sometimes when her shifts allowed, she would join them on these outings. Raphael observed how she interacted with her daughter. Infinite patience, constant encouragement, the perfect balance between authority and affection. She was an exceptional mother, and this perception only increased his admiration for her. On a particularly hot Saturday in November, Raphael invited them for a visit to Artec's headquarters. "Bea keeps asking what my workplace is like," he explained over the phone. "I thought I'd show her some of the projects we're working on. Things that might interest her." "Are you sure?" Julia asked, her hesitation evident in her voice. "We don't want to be a bother." "Not at all. The office will be practically empty on Saturday. We'll have the place to ourselves." When they arrived, Bea could barely contain her excitement. Her eyes scanned every detail of the modern architectural building, with its glass walls and open spaces. "It's like in the magazine pictures," she exclaimed. "You were on a magazine cover, you know." "Mom saved it." Raphael raised his eyebrows, looking at Julia, who blushed slightly. "It was an interesting article," she justified, "about entrepreneurs who transformed the tech market in the United States." Raphael smiled, secretly pleased to know that Julia had been interested in his career even before they met in person. He guided them through the office, showing the different departments, explaining in a simplified way the projects under development. When they reached the Innovation Lab, his favorite space in the company, Bea was especially fascinated by a prototype educational application they were developing. "This one is being created to help children learn basic programming in a fun way," Raphael explained, showing the colorful interface on the large screen. "Can I try?" Bea asked, her eyes shining with interest. Raphael shot a questioning glance at Julia, who nodded. "Of course. In fact, we'd love to get an expert opinion from someone your age." Bea sat down in front of the computer and with surprising ease began to navigate the application. In minutes, she was creating small sequences of commands that made an animated character move across the screen, collecting items and overcoming obstacles. "This is amazing, Bea," Raphael exclaimed, genuinely impressed by the girl's intuition for programming logic. "You picked it up much faster than many adults who tested the application." "It's easy," she replied with the characteristic modesty of someone who truly possesses a natural gift. "Hey, it's like putting together a puzzle, only you create the pieces." Raphael exchanged a meaningful look with Julia. Bea's potential was even greater than they imagined. For the next hour, they watched the girl explore increasingly advanced levels of the application, solving logic problems that had been designed for much older children. "You know," Raphael said as they watched Bea concentrating on the screen, "we can adapt her tutoring program to include basic programming. She clearly has an aptitude for it." Julia nodded, her eyes fixed on her daughter. "Sometimes I wonder where all this comes from. Neither Michael nor I have this ease with technology or numbers. Some people are simply born with it," Raphael replied. "I was like that with math as a child. I saw patterns where others saw only random numbers." Julia studied him for a moment. "It's strange how similar you are in some things. The way she furrows her brow when she's concentrating. You do exactly the same." Raphael felt a strange warmth spread in his chest with the observation. There was something deeply significant in the idea of sharing similarities with Bea, even if they were just coincidental mannerisms. After the office visit, Raphael invited them to lunch. They chose a relaxed restaurant near Prospect Park, with a children's play area. While Bea played in the kids' area after the meal, Raphael and Julia had a rare moment alone. "She's changing so fast," Julia commented, watching her daughter from afar. "The teachers say they've never seen such a good adaptation. Her grades are exceptional. She's made friends, she's participating in activities. It's like she's found her place in the world. She always had that potential. She just needed the right environment to flourish." Julia turned her gaze to Raphael. "It's more than that. She needed someone who believed in her besides me. Someone who could show possibilities I didn't even know existed." She paused. "You changed her life, Raphael. You changed our life." There was a contained emotion in Julia's voice, a vulnerability Raphael had rarely witnessed. Without thinking, he covered her hand with his on the table. "You've changed mine too," he admitted, surprising himself with the honesty of the confession. "Before I met you, my life was one-dimensional. Work, meetings, numbers, growth. There wasn't much room for anything else. And now, Tenasa, Raphael searched for the right words. Now there are Tuesdays and Thursdays. There are weekends at the park. There are text messages about how her day at school went and photos of science projects. His eyes met hers. There's you. The moment seemed to freeze between them. Julia didn't withdraw her hand, but Raphael saw the conflict in her eyes, the same hesitation he himself felt. There were invisible lines they both feared to cross, potential complications that could jeopardize the delicate balance they had built. B came running back at that instant, saving them from the need to elaborate on what had just been almost confessed. "Mom, can I have an ice cream?" "Please?" Julia seemed relieved by the interruption. "Just a small one, okay? We've already eaten a lot for lunch." The moment passed, but something had changed. In the days that followed, Raphael noticed a new layer of awareness between him and Julia, a silent recognition that feelings were growing beyond gratitude and friendship. In early December, the school organized an end-of-year musical performance. B, despite having started piano lessons only a few months prior, was invited to participate by playing a small piece. She was nervous but determined, practicing obsessively in the weeks leading up to the event. "What if I make a mistake?" she asked during one of her weekly lessons, which Raphael always attended. "Everyone will laugh. First," Raphael explained patiently, "no one will laugh. And second, even the greatest pianists in the world make mistakes sometimes. The secret is to keep playing without letting the mistake interrupt the music." B nodded, absorbing the advice. "Like in business. You once said you made many mistakes before getting it right." Raphael smiled, impressed by the analogy. "Exactly like in business. Failure is only permanent if you give up." On the night of the performance, Raphael was surprised by his own nervousness. Sitting beside Julia in the audience, he felt like an anxious father waiting for his daughter's performance. When B walked onto the stage, small and solemn in her navy blue dress, something tightened in his chest. "She'll do great," Julia whispered, squeezing his hand briefly. And B did. It wasn't perfect. There were a few hesitant notes, a brief moment where she seemed to lose rhythm. But her determination to continue, her small smile of concentration, and her graceful bow at the end drew one of the warmest ovations of the night. Raphael felt a pride that transcended anything he had ever experienced in his professional achievements. When B came off the stage and ran to hug them, he felt his eyes well up. "Did you see? I did it!" she exclaimed, radiant. "We saw, my love." "It was beautiful," Julia replied, hugging her daughter. "Uncle Raphael, I did as you said. When I messed up that part, I kept playing without stopping." Raphael crouched down to hug her. "You were amazing, B. I'm so proud." After the performance, other parents came to congratulate Julia, and some recognized Raphael. The introductions were always ambiguous. Julia never explicitly introduced him as a friend or as B's educational sponsor. It was simply, "This is Raphael. He accompanies B in piano and science classes." On some occasions, Raphael caught curious glances, unverbalized questions about what exactly his role in that family was. To be honest, he himself no longer knew how to define it clearly. He was more than a benefactor, certainly more than a casual friend, but the exact contours of that relationship remained undefined. At the end of the night, as he drove Julia and B home, the girl fell asleep in the back seat of the car, exhausted after the excitement of the performance. "She's asleep," Julia commented, looking back. "That rarely happens. She's usually full of energy until late at night." "Big emotions exhaust even our little scientist's batteries," Raphael replied fondly. Julia repeated softly, as if savoring the word. "It's funny how this happened, isn't it? 6 months ago we were complete strangers, and now..." Julia hesitated, looking out the window at the city lights. "Now you're part of her routine." "Of our routine." Raphael kept his eyes on the road but felt his heart racing. "Does that bother you?" "Should it?" Julia turned to him. "Does it bother you?" "No," he replied sincerely. "It's the best part of my life now." When they arrived at Julia's building, Raphael helped carry B asleep up to the apartment. The girl weighed surprisingly little in his arms, her breath slow and regular against his chest. Julia led the way to her daughter's small room, where he gently laid her on the bed. Together, in an almost ritual silence, they took off her shoes and covered her with a light sheet. In the hallway, far enough not to wake B, Julia whispered, "Thank you for today, for being there for her." "I couldn't be anywhere else," Raphael replied simply. They were close in the narrow hallway, illuminated only by the soft light coming from the living room. Raphael could see every detail of Julia's face, the small lines around her eyes, the gentle curve of her lips, the sparkle that remained in her gaze even after a long day. Without planning, without thinking about the consequences, he leaned in and kissed her. It was a brief, almost hesitant kiss, but filled with feelings that had been silently growing for months. When he pulled away, he saw surprise in Julia's eyes, but also something more, a recognition, perhaps, that this moment had been inevitable from the start. "Raphael," she began, but he gently interrupted her. "We don't need to define this now," he said softly. "We don't need to complicate things." Julia nodded, but there was a determination in her expression. "We have to be careful. For B, she's become so attached to you. I've become attached to her too." He paused. "To both of you." Julia smiled, a shy but genuine smile. "I know. That's what scares and delights me at the same time." Raphael gently touched her face. "We can take it slow, one step at a time." "One step at a time," she agreed. They said goodbye with another kiss, more confident this time, but still restrained by the awareness of what was at stake. On the way back home, Raphael felt a mixture of euphoria and apprehension. He was entering unknown territory, not just a new relationship, but one that involved a child, responsibilities, and expectations that went far beyond anything he had experienced before. The following week, Raphael found himself dividing his time between decisive corporate meetings. The Canadian investors were finally ready to close the deal, and increasingly frequent messages with Julia. Small things, mostly how B's day at school had been, a photo of something funny they saw, plans for the next weekend. But there were also more personal moments, when they talked late at night about dreams, fears, hopes for the future. On one of those nights, after a particularly intense exchange of messages, Raphael realized he was smiling at his phone screen like a teenager. Something was happening, something he hadn't planned. That didn't follow the carefully projected trajectory of his life, but that seemed more authentic and significant than any professional achievement. At Artec, his team noticed the subtle changes. The demanding and focused boss remained brilliant in business, but there was a new dimension, a flexibility, an empathy that wasn't present before. When an employee needed to take time off to care for his sick child, Raphael not only understood, but offered additional company resources to assist him. When another team member proposed a non-profit educational technology project, instead of dismissing the idea as distracting, he embraced it with enthusiasm. "What happened to you?" Marcus, his lawyer and longtime friend, asked during a business lunch. "Not that I'm complaining, but you're different, more human," Raphael laughed. "Let's just say I'm discovering there's more to life than financial statements and corporate mergers. Does it have to do with the mother of the girl who saved you from that scam?" "I heard rumors you've been seen with them." Raphael raised an eyebrow. "Since when does my personal life become fodder for company rumors?" "Since the man who worked 7 days a week, started blocking Tuesdays and Thursdays in his agenda, refused international trips without explanation, and showed up at school events like a proud father," Marcus replied with an ironic smile. "People notice, Raphael, and to be honest, most are thrilled to see you developing a life beyond the office." Raphael shook his head, surprised by the transparency of his transformation. "It's not that simple." "It never is," Marcus agreed, "especially when a child is involved. But maybe it's exactly what you needed, something you can't control, plan, or optimize like you do with your business." Marcus's words echoed in his mind in the weeks that followed. Christmas was approaching, and with it decisions about how they would spend the holidays. Raphael had planned to travel abroad, as he did every year, a solitary escape from a period that since his mother's death brought more melancholy than joy. But this year was different. He had B and Julia in his life now. On a Tuesday, while watching B at the science club, working intently on an experiment about thermal conductivity, Raphael made a decision. That night, after dropping B off at home, he invited Julia to talk on the small balcony of her apartment. "I was thinking about Christmas," he began. sitting beside her on the narrow bench that served as an outdoor area. "Do you two have plans?" Julia shrugged. "Normally we spend it with my sister in Philadelphia. It's very simple. Exchanging gifts, a basic dinner. Nothing too elaborate. And this year, we haven't decided yet. My sister is pregnant, not feeling very well. Maybe we'll just stay here." Raphael took a deep breath. "I have a beach house in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Nothing too big, but comfortable. I thought about inviting you to spend Christmas there. We could go on the 23rd, stay until after New Year's." He saw surprise on Julia's face, followed by a thoughtful expression. "That would be a big step, Raphael." "I know," he admitted. "And if it's too soon or if you don't feel comfortable, I completely understand. I just thought it might be nice. For all of us." Julia looked at the simple plants she grew in small pots on the balcony, a little piece of green amidst the city's concrete. Bea would love the beach. She rarely gets a chance to go, and she loves the ocean. It has a small private beach, great for kids. Calm water, almost no waves. Julia smiled. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" "Not everything," Raphael replied, taking her hand in his. "I'm not trying to rush anything. Julia, I just want to spend time with you in a special place, without the distractions of the city." She intertwined her fingers with his, a gesture that had become increasingly natural in recent weeks. "I'll talk to Bea. If she's excited, and I'm sure she will be, then yes, we'd love to spend Christmas with you." Raphael felt a wave of happiness he hadn't experienced in a long time. Impulsively, he pulled Julia closer and kissed her. Unlike the cautious kisses they had exchanged until then, this one was deeper, more intense, laden with unverbalized promises. "I've been waiting all day to do that," he confessed when they separated. Julia smiled, her eyes bright in the city twilight. "Only all day? I've waited much longer." When Bea heard about the invitation, her reaction was exactly as predicted, pure and unrestrained enthusiasm. The beach, with a pool, and Uncle Raphael. It's going to be the best Christmas ever. In the weeks leading up to the trip, Raphael found himself strangely nervous. He wanted everything to be perfect. He ordered carefully selected gifts for Bea: advanced science books, a small but powerful telescope, a programming kit suitable for her age. For Julia, he chose something more personal: a delicate gold necklace with a small piano-shaped pendant, symbolizing Bea's discovered talent and the journey they had embarked on together. The most surprising thing, however, was how he dedicated himself to preparing the beach house. Normally maintained by a staff and rarely visited, the place received his personal attention in the weeks prior. Raphael chose new furniture for what would be Bea's room, ensured the kitchen was equipped with everything they might need, and arranged Christmas decorations that had never before adorned that space. "I've never seen you so involved in something not business-related," his assistant commented when he cancelled 2 meetings to personally supervise the delivery of a Christmas tree to the beach house. Raphael smiled. "Let's just say I'm investing in a new kind of future." As the 23rd approached, Raphael realized with increasing clarity what was happening. The new bonds that had formed between him, Julia, and Bea were not just circumstantial or temporary connections. They were the foundations of something he had never truly contemplated before: a family. On the eve of the trip, while finalizing some matters at the office, Raphael received a drawing from Bea on his phone, a colorful depiction of 3 people holding hands in front of the sea, with a Christmas tree in the background. Below, in her careful handwriting, she had written, "The best Christmas family." Raphael looked at the image for a long time, feeling a deep emotion spread in his chest. Family, that's what they were becoming. That's what he, unknowingly, had been searching for all this time. The drive to Cape Cod that morning of December 23rd was surprisingly smooth. Raphael drove his SUV along Interstate 95, while Julia watched the landscape of the Appalachian Mountains through the window. In the back seat, Bea alternated between reading a book on astronomy and excitedly pointing to every waterfall or rock formation she spotted on the green slopes. "Look, Mum, that mountain looks like a profile of a face," Bea exclaimed, pressing her finger against the glass. Julia smiled. "I see it, honey. It really does." Raphael observed the interaction in the rearview mirror, feeling a quiet happiness that was new to his life. The car was loaded not only with luggage, but with carefully wrapped gifts. ingredients for Christmas dinner, and even a small portable science lab he had bought especially for Bea to experiment with during the holidays. "How much longer, Uncle Raphael?" Bea asked for the third time in the last hour. "Only about 40 more minutes," he replied patiently. "Just after New Haven, Connecticut, we'll take the road to Cape Cod. The house is on a more secluded beach past the town center." Julia gently touched his arm. "She's very excited. She barely slept last night." "I'm excited too," Raphael admitted. "It's been years since I spent Christmas with someone who truly matters." The sincerity of those words hung between them like a silent confession. In recent days, after the kiss on Julia's apartment balcony, something had shifted in their dynamic. What had begun as a cautious, almost formal relationship now overflowed with unverbalized possibilities. When they finally turned onto the dirt road leading to the property, Bea was practically bouncing in the back seat. The house emerged from among the trees, a modern construction, predominantly glass and wood, that blended harmoniously with the surrounding Atlantic forest landscape. It wasn't ostentatiously large, but its elegant architecture and privileged view of a small private cove made it special. "Wow," Bea exclaimed as the car stopped. "It looks like those houses in magazines." Raphael smiled, seeing the place through her eyes. "Shall we go in? I have some surprises prepared." As Julia helped her daughter out of the car, Raphael observed the two with a strange sense of completeness. 6 months ago, he couldn't have imagined his life would change so completely, due to a casual encounter with a 7-year-old girl on a red hotel sofa. Now he couldn't conceive of life without them. Upon entering, Bea let out a little shriek of joy. In the center of the living room, an imposing Christmas tree was already set up and decorated with twinkling lights, colorful ornaments and small scientific trinkets, miniatures of planets, atoms, microscopes, and test tubes. At the top, instead of the traditional star, there was a small satellite replica that rotated slowly. "It's a science tree," Bea exclaimed, running to examine every detail. "Look, Mom, they're the planets of the solar system in order." Julia looked at Raphael with an expression that mixed surprise and emotion. "You thought of everything, didn't you?" He shrugged, trying to downplay how much he truly cared. "So I thought she'd like something different from the traditional." Julia approached, speaking softly so Bea, engrossed with the ornaments, wouldn't hear. "No one has ever gone to so much trouble for her." "For us." Before Raphael could respond, Bea turned to him with shining eyes. "Can I see the rest of the house? Can I see the beach? Where's my room?" Raphael laughed. "Of course you can. Come on, I'll show you everything. And you have a special room prepared just for you." The tour of the house revealed more surprises. Bea's room had been decorated with a space theme. Glow-in-the-dark constellations painted on the ceiling, a small desk with a microscope and chemistry kit, shelves with science books appropriate for her age, on the wall a mural with a scale model of the solar system. "It's the most amazing room in the universe," Bea declared, spinning around to see everything. The master suite intended for Julia was elegantly minimalist with an ocean view. A third bedroom, which would be Raphael's, was across the hall. The respectful arrangement of the spaces did not go unnoticed by Julia, who shot him a grateful look for his consideration. When they reached the back of the house, a large wooden deck opened onto the spectacular view. A small private beach of light sand, framed by volcanic rocks and the turquoise-blue ocean typical of the Massachusetts coast. A stone path gently sloped down to the sand. "Can we go to the beach now?" "Please, please, please," Bea begged, already taking off her shoes. Julia and Raphael exchanged amused glances. "How about we unpack first? Have lunch and then spend the rest of the afternoon at the beach," Julia suggested. Bea made a momentary disappointed face, but soon brightened at the plan. "Okay, but can we eat lunch fast?" The rest of the day unfolded like a dream. They had lunch on the deck overlooking the sea. Afterwards, they spent hours on the beach, Bea building elaborate sandcastles while Raphael helped her understand basic engineering concepts to make bridges and towers that wouldn't collapse. Julia alternated between participating in the games and simply observing the two interacting, with a mixture of joy and a pang of apprehension she couldn't quite name. At sunset, sitting on the still warm sand, Raphael opened a bottle of wine for the adults and special juice for Bea. "A toast," he proposed, raising his glass, "to the best Christmas I've had in years." "To the best Christmas," Julia agreed, clinking her glass against his. "And to the best scientific godfather in the world," Bea added, raising her juice glass, making the adults laugh. The word godfather echoed in Raphael's mind, bringing a mix of emotions. It was a role he had initially assumed, but which now seemed insufficient to describe what he felt. However, respecting boundaries was essential. Each step needed to be taken at the right time. That night, after a dinner filled with laughter, Bea fell asleep quickly, exhausted after a day of excitement and outdoor activities. Raphael and Julia found themselves alone on the deck, under a sky dotted with stars as rarely seen in the city. "She's in love with this place," Julia commented, leaning against him softly. "I don't think I've ever seen her so happy." Raphael watched the moon's reflection on the sea. "And you? Are you enjoying it too?" Julia turned to face him. "You know I am. It's all perfect." She paused as if searching for the right words. "Almost too perfect, actually." "What do you mean?" She sighed, looking back at the ocean. "Sometimes I wonder if we're living a fantasy. If this version of our life, the expensive schools, the piano lessons, the trips to beach houses, is really sustainable." Raphael felt a tightening in his chest. "Are you worried I'll disappear? That I'll get tired?" "It's not just that." Julia chose her words carefully. "It's more complex. Bea is becoming deeply attached to you, to this lifestyle. And she hesitated. "I am too." Raphael took her hand in his. "It's not a fantasy for me, Julia. It's the most real life I've ever had. But our lives are so different. You're Raphael Davies, owner of Artec, a successful businessman. I'm a hotel housekeeping supervisor, a single mother living in the Bronx. So what?" The simplicity of the question contrasted with the complexity of what they were discussing. "So I'm afraid that one day you'll wake up and realize your life was better before. Simpler. More aligned with what you always planned." Raphael considered her words for a long moment. "You know what I've realized in the last few months? That all my plans were incomplete. I built a company, accumulated money, gained recognition. And for what? To return to an empty penthouse every night? To have no one to truly share the achievements with?" Julia listened intently, her eyes fixed on his. "When I met you and Bea, something changed, as if I finally understood why I worked so hard all these years. It wasn't just for success itself, but to be able one day to offer something meaningful to someone important." He squeezed her hand lightly. "You gave me a purpose I didn't even know I was looking for." Julia's eyes shone in the moonlight, moist with unshed tears. "I'm so afraid, Raphael. Afraid to believe this, and then—" He leaned in, gently touching her face. "Let's make a deal. One day at a time. No pressure, no grandiose expectations, just living this that we're building." "One day at a time," she repeated, as if testing the concept, starting with the perfect Christmas for Bea. Julia smiled, visibly relaxing. "She's going to go crazy when she sees all those presents under the tree. Maybe we overdid it a little," Raphael admitted with a guilty smile. "But I wanted to make up for all the Christmases I missed." "Christmases you didn't even know you were missing," Julia completed. "Understanding. The kiss they shared then was different from the previous ones. Deeper, more confident, laden with unverbalized promises. When they finally separated, they remained embraced, watching the hypnotic movement of the waves under the moonlight. Christmas morning arrived with bright sunshine and the sound of the waves. Raphael woke early and was preparing breakfast when he heard Bea's hurried footsteps running down the hallway. "Uncle Raphael. Uncle Raphael." She burst into the kitchen like a hurricane of energy. "There are a lot of presents under the tree." "A lot. Some have my name." Raphael smiled, feigning surprise. "Really? Santa Claus must have found our address here at the beach." Bea rolled her eyes. "I know there's no real Santa Claus, but thanks for not treating me like a baby pretending there is." Raphael laughed, once again impressed by her maturity. "Has your mom woken up yet?" "She's showering. I told her we'll wait for her to open the presents, even if it's very, very hard to wait." She looked at the frying pan where he was making pancakes. "Can I help?" "Of course. How about adding the chopped fruit to this bowl here?" They worked side by side, with Bea excitedly recounting her plans for the day. When Julia appeared, hair damp and expression rested, she found the two plating breakfast on the deck table. "Good morning," she said, smiling at the domestic scene. "Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas, Mom." "Can we open the presents after breakfast, please? Uncle Raphael and I made special Christmas pancakes. Breakfast proceeded with Bee's contained excitement, who could barely wait to attack the pile of presents. When they finally went to the living room, her eyes sparkled with anticipation. The presents were opened amidst exclamations of surprise and joy. Bee could hardly believe the number of wonderful things. The telescope, the books, the programming kit, educational games, even a small portable digital piano so she could practice during the holidays. "This is amazing," she exclaimed repeatedly, hugging Raphael and Julia alternately. Julia was visibly moved when she opened Raphael's gift, the delicate necklace with the piano pendant. "It's beautiful," she whispered, allowing him to place it around her neck, his fingers gently brushing her skin. Bee had prepared gifts too, elaborate and colorful drawings for both of them. For Raphael, she had created a detailed representation of Artec with computers, people working, and in the center, a figure who was clearly him, smiling. For Julia, a family portrait, the three of them holding hands under a starry sky. "It's us," Bee explained, pointing to the drawing. "Our family." Raphael and Julia exchanged emotional glances. "It's the most beautiful family I've ever seen," Raphael commented, his voice slightly choked. The rest of Christmas Day flowed in a bubble of shared happiness. They cooked dinner together, a mix of traditional American dishes and some special recipes Raphael's mother used to prepare. Bee insisted on helping with everything, from chopping ingredients to decorating the table with branches of native plants she had gathered from the garden. During the meal, sitting at the large deck table overlooking the sea, Raphael watched Julia and Bee chatting animatedly and felt a growing certainty that he never wanted to spend another Christmas without them. The feeling was so strong, so absolute, that it almost scared him. At night, after Bee finally fell asleep exhausted, but still reluctant to end such a special day, Raphael and Julia sat on the beach, a shared blanket over their shoulders against the night breeze. "I think we've created a problem," Julia commented, leaning back against him. "How are we going to top this Christmas next year?" The casual mention of a shared future made Raphael's heart race. "I have some ideas," he replied, hugging her closer. "But the important thing isn't the presents or the place. It's being together." Julia turned her face to him, her eyes reflecting the stars above. "You really believe that, don't you? That this can work, us?" "I believe it," he replied simply. "In fact, I've never believed in something so much in my life." The kiss they shared then sealed an unverbalized promise. The waves gently broke on the beach, silently witnessing the beginning of something neither of them had planned, but which now seemed as inevitable as the tide itself. The days that followed were filled with the perfect simplicity of family holidays, walks on the beach, explorations of nearby trails, stargazing sessions with Bee's new telescope, board games at night. Raphael was surprised by the ease with which he adapted to the family routine, as if he had always been destined for it. During the day, he and Bee often got lost in long conversations about science, technology, and the future. The girl's thirst for knowledge was insatiable, and Raphael found himself constantly challenged by her insightful questions. At night, after she fell asleep, Raphael and Julia found time for themselves. Deep conversations on the deck, nocturnal walks on the beach, moments of growing intimacy that gradually transformed their connection into something deeper. On New Year's Eve, as they prepared a picnic to take to the beach and watch the fireworks from the neighboring town, Raphael's cell phone rang. It was Marcus, his lawyer. "Raphael, sorry to interrupt your vacation, but we need to talk. The Canadians are proposing a significant change to the deal." Raphael stepped a few paces away, lowering his voice. "What kind of change?" "They want you to move to Toronto for 2 years to personally oversee the expansion. It's non-negotiable, according to them. Either you go or the investment is cut in half." Raphael felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. 2 years? That wasn't in the initial agreement. "It wasn't, but they consider your presence essential for the operation's success." Marcus paused. "I know it's not ideal timing, but it's an extraordinary opportunity. We need to give them an answer by January 10th. "I understand. I'll think about it." When he hung up, he noticed Julia watching him from the kitchen door, a worried expression on her face. "Trouble at work?" Raphael forced a smile. "Nothing urgent." Just some adjustments to the agreement with the Canadians. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. However, he didn't want to ruin the last days of their vacation with news that could potentially change everything. "We can talk about it when we get back to New York City." Julia nodded, but there was a shadow of concern in her eyes, as if somehow she sensed that the fairy tale they were living was about to face its first real test. That night, as fireworks exploded in the sky over the ocean, and Bia exclaimed with each colorful burst, Raphael held Julia in his arms and faced the first true dilemma since he had met them: how to reconcile the life he had planned for years with the life he had just discovered he desired more than anything else. The return to New York City brought with it the weight of reality. The congested streets, the incessant noise, the pollution, everything contrasted drastically with the idyllic days in Cape Cod. But for Raphael, the most significant contrast was internal. The uncomplicated joy of the holidays now gave way to the anxiety of the decision he needed to make. In the first week of January, Artec was buzzing with the start of the fiscal year. There were meetings scheduled hourly, closing reports to review, strategies for the new quarter to be defined. Amidst all this, the Canadians' proposal hung like a dark cloud over Raphael's thoughts. "We need to give them an answer this week," Marcus reminded him during a closed-door meeting on Wednesday afternoon. "The Canadians are pressing." Raphael looked out his office window, observing the city below, the same view that used to fill him with satisfaction, a visual reminder of everything he had achieved. Now, however, he found himself torn between that life and something entirely new. 2 years in Toronto, he murmured, more to himself than to his lawyer. "It's a long time." Marcus adjusted his glasses, studying him with curiosity. "Before you would have packed your bags without a second thought. What's changed?" Raphael turned to face him. Everything. It was no exaggeration. In 6 months, his outlook on life had completely transformed. The Raphael of before, focused exclusively on the company's growth, willing to sacrifice anything for it, now seemed like a stranger, someone whose worldview he could no longer fully comprehend. "It's because of them, isn't it?" The mother and daughter. Raphael didn't answer directly. "How important is this deal for the company, really? How essential is it for our long-term strategy?" Marcus sighed. "You know the answer. It's the step you've planned for years, the entry into the North American market, the international validation of our technology. Without your presence there, the investment is cut in half, and the expansion is compromised. What if we delegated? What if we sent a trusted team? Carla is more than ready to lead the operation, and with remote supervision—" "Raphael," Marcus interrupted gently, "you're looking for alternatives that don't exist." The Canadians were clear. They want you specifically. Your reputation, your knowledge, your vision, not a substitute, however competent she may be. Raphael ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I need more time." "You have until Friday." Marcus stood up, adjusting his jacket. At the door, he turned one last time. "Whatever your decision, know that the company will survive. The question is, will you be able to live with the regret if you refuse?" Marcus's question, about which regret would be harder to bear, stayed with Raphael for the rest of the day. In the late afternoon, he automatically drove to Julia and B's apartment, as he had done every Tuesday and Thursday since they returned from Cape Cod. The car was full of materials for B's new school semester. She would start 2nd grade at the private school in 2 weeks, and he had taken on the task of providing everything she would need, from uniforms to books, from art supplies to physical education equipment. He parked in front of the familiar building, greeting the doorman who already knew him by name. As he waited for the elevator, he tried to organize his thoughts. He needed to talk to Julia about the Canadians' proposal, about what it would mean for the relationship they were building. What would he say? How would he explain that, despite all the perfect moments they had shared in recent weeks, he was now seriously considering moving to another country for 2 years? Guilt tightened in his chest. He felt as if he was betraying a promise, even though he had never explicitly made one. The apartment door opened before he even rang the doorbell. B was there, radiant as always, wearing a Discovery Museum t-shirt they had bought together. "Uncle Raphael, did you bring my new books? Can I see them? Teacher Helen sent an email saying we're going to study robotics this year, and I'm already reading everything I can find about it, and..." The flood of enthusiastic words continued as he entered, carrying the bags of school supplies. Julia appeared at the kitchen door, drying her hands on a dish towel, a welcoming smile on her face. "Hectic," he replied vaguely, placing the bags on the sofa. "How about yours?" "Bea had her last math tutoring session today. The teacher said she's more than ready for second grade. In fact, she could easily skip a grade." "I don't want to skip," Bea protested, already unpacking her new books with enthusiasm. "I have my friends there." Raphael sat down, watching the girl examine each new book with the reverence of someone receiving a treasure. How could he abandon this? How could he miss 2 years, critical years of her development? But also, how could he give up what he had worked his entire life to achieve? Dinner proceeded with the cozy normality that had become part of their routine. Bea dominated the conversation with animated plans for the new school year, questions about the music lessons she would resume, ideas for science projects. Raphael and Julia listened, commented, and laughed at the girl's insightful observations. It was a perfect domestic scene. A family gathered around a simple table, sharing not just a meal but dreams, plans, expectations. Raphael felt the knot in his throat tighten more and more. After dinner, when Bea finally retired to organize her new books on her bedroom shelf, Raphael and Julia sat on the small balcony. It was time, the moment he had been postponing all day. "Julia," he began hesitantly, "we need to talk about something." She nodded, a serious expression coming over her face. "I know, I noticed something was wrong since Cape Cod, after that phone call." Raphael swallowed hard. "The Canadian investors, they made a new demand. They want me to move to Toronto for 2 years to personally oversee the expansion." There was a moment of absolute silence, as if even the city noises had been momentarily silenced. Julia stared fixedly at a fern plant in the corner of the balcony. 2 years, she repeated finally, her voice controlled. "And you're considering it." "I have no choice. If I refuse, the investment is cut in half. The entire international expansion plan I've built over the past few years is compromised." Julia turned to face him, her eyes searching for something in his. "You always have a choice, Raphael. The question is what you value most." The words hit him like a punch to the stomach. That was exactly the core of the issue, wasn't it? What did he value most? "It's not that simple," he protested. "Artec is my life. It's everything I've built, years of work, sacrifice." "And what are we?" Julia asked, her voice now trembling despite the visible effort to keep it steady. "A convenient distraction. An interesting chapter that now needs to be closed so you can return to the main narrative of your life." "Of course not." Raphael took her hands in his. "You've become everything to me. That's why I'm so torn. Before I met you, this decision would have been automatic. Now..." Julia gently withdrew her hands. "Raphael, I understand your position. Truly, you've worked your whole life for this. But you need to understand mine too." She took a deep breath. "I can't put Bea through another abandonment." The word abandonment fell like a stone between them. Raphael felt his chest tighten. "I wouldn't be abandoning you." "We could find a way. Frequent visits, maybe you could even move with me eventually." Julia shook her head. "My life is here. My job, my sister who is pregnant, the doctors who follow Bea, the school where she finally adapted. And even if that wasn't an impediment, how would we explain to Bea that the man who has become so important in her life will now be thousands of miles away? For 2 years, the reality of the situation became increasingly clear and painful. There was no perfect solution, no middle ground that could satisfy all parties. "When do you need to respond?" Julia asked. "Friday." She nodded as if confirming something she already suspected. 2 days. "Well, I don't envy your position." There was a resigned sadness in her voice. "Whatever your decision, Raphael, I want you to know that I am grateful for everything you've done for Bea. Regardless of what happens, you've changed her life for the better." The use of the past tense did not go unnoticed. Julia was already preparing for an end, protecting herself from the imminent pain. "Julia, The words caught in his throat. "Uncle Raphael." Bea's voice interrupted the tense moment. She appeared at the balcony door, holding one of her new books. "Look what I found in this astronomy book. It has an entire chapter on artificial satellites." Raphael forced a smile, turning to the girl. Really? How cool! Shall we take a look? The rest of the evening passed in a strange duality, B's genuine excitement contrasting with the veiled tension between the adults. When it was time for Raphael to leave, B hugged him with the absolute confidence of someone who has no doubt he will be present the next day, and the next and on all the important days to come. See you Thursday. Uncle Raphael. Don't forget we're going to continue the microscope experiment. Raphael felt a tightening in his chest. I won't forget, B. In the elevator, alone with his thoughts, the magnitude of the decision he needed to make seemed to suffocate him. On one side, the professional dream of a lifetime. Artec's international expansion, global recognition, the final validation of everything he had built from nothing. On the other, the family he had never planned, but which he now couldn't imagine himself without. The next 2 days were a torment. During the day, endless meetings at Artec demanded his attention, but his mind constantly returned to the dilemma. At night, alone in his penthouse, he turned over every possibility, every scenario, every consequence. He tried to call Julia several times, but the conversations were brief, almost formal. The emotional barrier she had erected was almost palpable. She was protecting herself, preparing for the farewell she considered inevitable. On Friday morning, Raphael had still not made a decision. He felt paralyzed between two worlds, unable to choose one without destroying the other. He arrived at the office earlier than usual, hoping that solitude and silence would bring some clarity. On his desk, he found a photo he kept discreetly among his papers. B on the day of her piano recital, smiling radiantly with Julia by her side, a family that could have been his, that perhaps still could be. Good morning, Marcus's voice interrupted his thoughts. The lawyer entered holding a folder. The documents are ready. We just need your final decision to send them to the Canadians. Raphael gestured to the chair in front of him. Sit down, Marcus. I need to ask you a question. The lawyer obeyed, a curious expression on his face. Of course. If I were to go to Toronto, who would you recommend to lead the operation here? Who could take over the day-to-day running of the company? Marcus considered the question for a moment. Carla would be the obvious choice. She knows every aspect of the business, has the team's trust, and is as visionary as you in many ways. And you think she could handle it? Absolutely. In fact, Marcus hesitated. In fact what? In fact, I think she's been ready for it for some time, just waiting for the opportunity. Raphael nodded slowly, processing the information. An idea began to form in his mind. Not a perfect solution, but perhaps an alternative path he hadn't considered. What if we proposed a restructuring to the Canadians? I would go to Toronto initially, for 3 months to establish the operation. Then, Carla would take over as Director of International Operations, moving there permanently. I would supervise remotely with quarterly week-long visits. Marcus raised his eyebrows. That would be an unusual model. I don't know if the Canadians would accept. We would offer compensation, a slightly larger share of the international operations profits. And I would still be personally involved, just not residing there for the full 2 years. The lawyer thought for a moment. We could try. It's a reasonable proposal, and we have solid arguments in its favor. Carla really is exceptionally qualified. He studied Raphael's face. Is this your final decision, then? To try to renegotiate? Raphael looked again at the photo on his desk. Yes, it's my final decision. And if they refuse? The question hung in the air for a moment, laden with implications. If the Canadians refused the counter-proposal, Raphael would be back to square one, forced to choose between Artec's international expansion and his life with Julia and B. If they refuse, he finally replied, we'll have to seek other investors, or scale back our expansion plans. Marcus didn't hide his surprise. You really have changed, Raphael. I have, he confirmed. I realize there are more important things than seeing Artec's name on every continent. Like a 7-year-old girl and her mother. Raphael smiled. Exactly like a 7-year-old girl and her mother. After Marcus left to begin negotiations with the Canadians, Raphael sat in silence, feeling a strange relief. For the first time in days, he breathed without the overwhelming weight of indecision. There were no guarantees that his counter-proposal would be accepted, of course. There was a real risk that the entire deal would collapse. But surprisingly, that possibility no longer terrified him. Artec would survive. They would find other ways to grow, other ways to expand. What wouldn't survive, what he couldn't get back, were the moments with Julia and Bea, the family they were building together. He picked up his cell phone and typed a message to Julia. "I've made my decision. Can we talk tonight?" The reply came almost immediately. "Of course. Bea has choir practice until 7. Can we meet at the cafe near her school at 6? Raphael confirmed and returned to work, feeling strangely light despite the uncertainty that still hung over the company's future. He had made his choice. Now he needed to convince Julia that it was genuine and definitive. At 6 o'clock sharp, he was sitting in the designated cafe, a cozy place frequented mainly by parents, waiting for their children's extracurricular activities to end. Julia arrived a few minutes later, her face marked by the fatigue of difficult days. "Hi," she said, sitting across from him. "You look different." Raphael smiled. "I feel different. Lighter, in a way. So you decided to go to Toronto? It wasn't a question, but a resigned conclusion." "Not exactly." Raphael took her hands in his. "I decided that if I have to choose between Artec's international expansion and you, I choose you. Without hesitation." Julia blinked, confused. "What?" "I proposed an alternative to the Canadians. I would go initially for 3 months to establish the operation, and then Carla, my technology director, would take over permanently. I would supervise remotely with short quarterly visits. What if they don't accept? Then we'll look for other investors. Or resize our plans." He gently squeezed her hands. "What I won't do is spend 2 years away from you. I realized I can't. I don't want to." Julia's eyes filled with tears. "Raphael, are you sure? It's your life stream. Everything you've worked to achieve. Dreams change," he replied simply. "I realized I built Artec in large part because I had nothing else. It was my whole life because there was no room for anything else. Now there is." He paused. "Now there's you." Julia let out a shaky sigh as if finally allowing herself to believe. "I don't want you to regret it. To one day look back and think about what could have been." Raphael shook his head. "The only regret would be losing what we're building. The rest, the business, the international expansion, we'll find other ways. Maybe not exactly as I had imagined, but still." Julia interrupted him with a kiss, the first she initiated spontaneously, without hesitation or doubt. When they separated, there was a new sparkle in her eyes. "Bea will be so relieved," she said. "I think she sensed something was wrong. She's been asking me every day if you're still going to visit us." "Always," Raphael promised. "In fact," he hesitated, uncertain if it was the right moment. "In fact, I was wondering if we couldn't spend more time together. Not just a few afternoons a week." Julia raised an eyebrow. "What are you suggesting?" "Nothing rushed," he assured her. "Just maybe we could consider living closer to each other. There are excellent communities near Bea's school with more space, safer. Raphael Davies, are you trying to buy us a house?" The tone was playful, but there was an underlying seriousness to the question. "I'm trying to build a life with you," he answered honestly. "The exact format we can define together. One step at a time, remember." Julia smiled, the tension of the past few days finally dissipating from her shoulders. "One step at a time. I like that." When they left the cafe to pick up Bea from choir practice, they walked hand in hand with a new certainty about the path they had chosen together. The future still held many unknowns. The Canadians' response, Artec's next steps, how exactly they would integrate their very different lives. But one thing was clear: the crossroads were behind them. Raphael had made his choice, not the path he had always planned, but the one he had discovered he desired with all his soul. The Canadian investor's answer arrived the following Monday, faster than Raphael expected. He was in a meeting with the development team when Marcus entered the room, an enigmatic expression on his face. "They responded," he simply said, handing a sealed envelope to Raphael. The room fell silent. Everyone at Artec knew the importance of that agreement, how it represented the company's definitive leap into the international arena. Raphael opened the envelope with slightly trembling fingers, aware that its contents could significantly alter the future of the company he had built from scratch. He read the document once, then again, to make sure he fully understood the terms. When he finally looked up, he met a dozen anxious faces turned towards him. "They accepted," he announced, a smile slowly spreading across his face. With some conditions, but the essence of our proposal was accepted. A collective sigh of relief swept through the room, followed by congratulations and enthusiastic questions. Raphael raised his hand, asking for silence. The conditions are, first, I will be in Toronto for an initial 6 months, not 3. Second, Carla will need to go through a transition period with me there before fully taking over the operation. And third, he paused, turning specifically to his technology director, who was watching him with a mixture of surprise and expectation. Carla will receive an equity stake in the Canadian subsidiary, effectively becoming a partner in the international operation. Carla Miller, a 40-year-old woman with short hair and a habitually serious expression, couldn't suppress a smile. Are you serious, Raphael? Completely. It was even their suggestion after reviewing your resume and contributions to the company. Apparently they were as impressed as I've always been. He returned the smile. We need to talk privately about the details, but the offer is on the table. To permanently lead the Canadian operation with an equity stake. The meeting proceeded with animated discussions about the next steps, revised timelines, and the temporary succession plan for Raphael's absence during the initial 6 months. When everyone dispersed, only Marcus remained in the room. You look relieved, the lawyer commented. Raphael let out a sigh. You have no idea how much. For a moment, I thought we would have to give up on the expansion entirely. Marcus shook his head. That wouldn't have happened. You would have found a middle ground. You always do. This time was different, Raphael admitted. For the first time, there was something I wasn't willing to sacrifice, no matter the professional cost. Julia and B. It wasn't a question. Raphael nodded. I need to call her. Give her the news. The conversation with Julia was brief but filled with emotion. 6 months was still a considerable period, but infinitely more manageable than 2 years. They could visit Toronto during Bay's summer break in July. Raphael would return to the United States at least once in the middle of the period. It was a compromise they could both live with. I'm proud of you, Julia said at the end of the call, for finding a way that respects both your professional dreams and what we're building together. Her words warmed Raphael's heart in a way no corporate success ever had. I'll tell Bea personally tonight, if that's okay. She'll love it. She's been talking about you all day. Apparently, the solar energy science project you started is revolutionizing the scientific knowledge of her class. Julia chuckled softly. Her exact words, and that night, Raphael arrived at Julia's apartment with a pizza box and news that he knew would be received with mixed feelings by Bea. The girl greeted him with her usual enthusiasm, talking non-stop about her day at school and how her teacher had been impressed with the solar panel prototype they had built together. During dinner, Raphael explained the situation as simply as possible. Remember I told you about my company expanding into Canada? Well, I'll need to stay in Toronto for a while to organize everything. Bea stopped eating, her face suddenly serious. How long? 6 months. The girl's big eyes widened. That's a long time. She did a quick mental calculation. That's 180 days. Raphael couldn't help but smile at her mathematical precision. Yes, roughly that. But we won't be completely separated. You can visit me during your summer break in July, and I'll come back to the United States at least once during that time. But what about science club? And my piano lessons? You promised you'd be there. The accusation, so sincere and direct, hit Raphael like a physical blow. Julia intervened gently. Bea, remember what we talked about commitments and responsibilities. Uncle Raphael's work is very important, and this expansion into Canada is a dream he's had for a long time. Bea crossed her arms, unconvinced. But we're important too. Yes, you are, Raphael confirmed, leaning in to look directly into her eyes. You're so important that initially they wanted me to stay there for 2 years, and I said no. I said I needed to find a way to make this work without being away from you for so long. The revelation seemed to soften Bea's expression a little. 2 years? That would be 730 days. Exactly. A very long time. That's why I negotiated to reduce it to 6 months. And after those 6 months, I'll be back permanently. In fact, he exchanged a look with Julia, who nodded encouragingly. In fact, when I come back, I was thinking we could consider living closer to each other. Maybe even together. Bea's eyes instantly lit up. Together? Like a real family? There was a moment of silence heavy with meaning. Raphael chose his words carefully. If your mom agrees, and if you want to, too. Yes, like a family. The smile that spread across Bee's face was worth every anxious moment of the previous weeks. That would be perfect. We could do science experiments every day. And you could help me with my homework whenever I needed. Julia and Raphael exchanged amused glances. I think she's more interested in your scientific knowledge than your company, Julia joked. We can make a deal then, Raphael proposed, turning back to Bee. During these 6 months, we'll keep in touch with regular video calls. We'll continue our science projects remotely. And you can send me emails telling me about your progress on the piano. When I come back, we'll resume everything in person. What do you think? Bee considered the proposal with the seriousness of a small executive evaluating a business contract. Can I think of additional conditions? Raphael laughed. Of course you can. What would they be? First condition, video calls at least 3 times a week. Second condition, you have to watch my mid-year piano recital even if it's by video. Third condition, when you come back, we'll go to the planetarium on the first weekend. The list of demands, so clear and assertive, revealed much about Bee's personality, her organizational skills, her understanding of what was truly important to her, and her willingness to negotiate rather than simply yield or completely oppose. I accept all conditions, Raphael responded solemnly, extending his hand to seal the agreement. Bee shook his hand seriously, then broke into a smile. So it's a deal. You go, but you come back, and then we live together, and we're a family. The simplicity with which the child summarized the situation touched something deep in Raphael's heart. That was exactly it. He would go, but he would return, and then they would build something permanent together. The rest of the evening passed in a lighter mood. Bee insisted on showing her latest science project, research on sustainable housing, that included a model made from recycled materials. Julia watched their interaction, marveling at the special connection they had developed. When it was time for Raphael to leave, Bee hugged him with extra force. 6 months, she whispered, as if reaffirming to herself the time they would be separated. 6 months, he confirmed, kissing the top of her head. And then a lifetime. At the apartment door, Julia kissed him long. We'll miss you, she said simply, and I'll miss you both, but we'll make it work. In the weeks that followed, Raphael divided his time between preparations for the temporary move and the desire to spend as much time as possible with Julia and Bee before his departure. The date was set, March 15th. This gave them just over a month together. It was a period of intense activity. At Artec, preparation for international expansion occupied almost all business hours. Carla needed to be briefed on every aspect of the operation she would take over. Documentation needed to be finalized, work visas processed, accommodations in Toronto secured. In the late afternoons and evenings, Raphael dedicated every available minute to Julia and Bee. Tuesdays and Thursdays remained reserved for the girls' school activities, but now there were also frequent dinners, weekend outings, and even some nights when he slept at their apartment, occupying the convertible sofa in the living room, so Bee would gradually get used to his more constant presence in the house. It was during one of those weekends, while strolling through Prospect Park on a sunny February Sunday, that Raphael brought up a topic he had been considering for weeks. I've been thinking, he began, as they watched Bee feed the ducks in one of the park's ponds. Maybe we could start looking for a new place even before I leave. Something that better suits all our needs. Julia looked at him with surprise. So soon? I thought we'd wait until you returned. We can wait if you prefer, he hastened to say. I just thought it would be good to have a place defined for when I come back. Something for us to plan together, even from a distance, a common project. Julia considered the idea, watching her daughter, who was now chasing a colorful ball a few meters away. I don't know if it's a good idea for us to move while you're away. It would be too much change for Bee all at once. Not necessarily moving immediately, Raphael clarified. Just choosing the place, perhaps starting some renovations or adaptations. The actual move could wait until my return. Julia nodded slowly. That makes sense. And where were you thinking? There are some communities near Bee's school that offer much more space and security. Or we could consider Greenwich Village, also relatively close to the school. Or maybe you prefer some other neighborhood. Actually, Julia hesitated, I've always liked Greenwich Village. It has more of a neighborhood atmosphere, less corporate. More street life, farmers' markets, that sense of community. Raphael smiled, surprised and delighted by the suggestion. Greenwich Village would be perfect. We could find a house with a garden, perhaps. Something with space for Bee to play. For us to set up a small lab for her. An office for you too, Julia added. And maybe, she blushed slightly, maybe an extra bedroom for the future. The implication in her words did not go unnoticed. Raphael felt his heart race. For the future, he repeated, taking her hand in his. I like the sound of that. That week they contacted a real estate agent recommended by a colleague at Artec. They specified their requirements, a house in Greenwich Village, preferably with a garden, 3 or 4 bedrooms close to parks, and with easy access to Bee's school. To their surprise, the agent found an almost perfect property in a few days, a recently renovated contemporary-style house on a quiet street in Greenwich Village. It had 3 bedrooms, an office that could be converted into an additional bedroom, a backyard with a small leisure area, and was only a 15-minute drive from Bee's school. It's almost too perfect, Julia commented when they visited the property for the first time. It seems too good to be true. The agent, a middle-aged woman named Regina, smiled. There's a reason it's available at this price. The previous owners need to sell quickly. They're moving abroad for professional reasons and prefer to close the deal as soon as possible. Raphael and Julia exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. The situation was ironically similar to what they would soon face, with the crucial difference that Raphael would be returning after 6 months, not leaving indefinitely. What do you think? He asked as they explored the backyard. Can you see us living here? Julia observed the space, the mature tree that would provide shade on hot days, the small area that could be transformed into a deck for outdoor dining, the perfect spot for a vegetable garden she had always wanted to cultivate. I can, she replied simply. And you? Raphael looked at the house, imagining Bee running through the corridors, doing science experiments at the deck table, practicing piano in the spacious living room. He envisioned nights watching movies together, lazy Sunday breakfasts, birthdays, Christmases, a lifetime of memories waiting to be built. Yes, he finally replied, this place could be our home. The decision was made almost naturally. They would make an offer. If accepted, they would start the purchase process immediately, but the actual move would only happen after Raphael's return from Canada. It was a commitment, a concrete promise of a shared future. When they told Bee the news, the reaction was exactly as expected, absolute enthusiasm, followed by a million questions about her new room, whether they could have a dog now that they would have a garden, and if she could paint the walls with scientific themes. 1 theme per wall, Julia negotiated, laughing, and we'll talk about the dog later. In the weeks leading up to Raphael's departure, the house purchase moved quickly. The former owners accepted the offer, financing was approved and preliminary documents were signed. The house would officially be theirs at the end of March, ironically when Raphael would already be in Toronto. I'll send photos of each stage, Julia promised, and we can decide together about renovations and decoration, even from a distance. Technology exists for a reason, Raphael agreed. We'll make it work. The last weekend before his departure was dedicated exclusively to Bee and Julia. They visited the Discovery Museum, a place that had become special to them since their first outing together. They had dinner at the small Italian restaurant where they had had their first meal alone. They spent hours at the park, unhurried, just enjoying each other's company. On the eve of his departure, Raphael took Bee for a special afternoon, just the 2 of them. They visited Artec's headquarters, where the girl got to learn more about his work and even participate in a small technological demonstration specially prepared for her by the development team. Afterwards, they went to a bookstore, where Raphael let her choose as many science books as she wanted, a supply for the months of separation. Promise you won't forget our video call tomorrow? Bee asked as they returned home. Not even if the world is ending, Raphael assured her. 7 o'clock at night in New York, which will be 10 in the morning in Toronto. I'll be there on screen waiting for you. Bee nodded, satisfied with the promise. 6 months goes by fast, doesn't it? Very fast, he confirmed, hoping it was true. The night brought a more intimate farewell with Julia after Bea fell asleep. Sitting on the small balcony, under New York City's partially starry sky, they talked about the future, about plans for the new house, about the 6 months to come. "Promise you won't meet any beautiful Canadian women and forget about us?" Julia joked, but there was a real vulnerability behind the question. Raphael took her face in his hands. "Julia Smith, in the last 9 months, you and Bea have become the center of my universe. Nothing and no one could change that. Not distance, not time, not all the Canadian women in the world." She laughed, but her eyes were moist. "I hate goodbyes." "It's not a goodbye," he corrected softly. "It's just a see you soon. We'll be in touch every day. And before you know it, I'll be back helping to move furniture into our new house." "Our house," Julia repeated, as if savoring the words. "It still feels like a dream." "The most real of dreams," Raphael assured her. "We're building foundations, Julia, for something that will last much longer than 6 months." When the taxi arrived the next morning to take him to the airport, Bea was still in her pajamas, her eyes sleepy, but determined to say a proper goodbye. She hugged Raphael with surprising strength for someone so small. "Remember our agreement," she said, serious. 3 video calls a week at least." "I remember every detail," Raphael assured her. "And you remember to keep being the brightest scientist in your class." "That's easy," Bea replied, with the adorable confidence that always charmed him. Julia's farewell was more restrained, aware that Bea was watching. A long hug, a soft kiss, whispered promises. As the taxi pulled away, Raphael looked out the rear window, watching the 2 figures on the sidewalk. One tall, one small, waving until the car turned the corner. He felt a tightening in his chest, a mixture of sadness at the separation and joy at having something so precious that made the goodbye so difficult. At the airport, while waiting for his flight, he did something he never imagined doing. He went into a jewelry store and bought a ring. Nothing extravagant, but elegant and meaningful. He didn't know exactly when or how he would use it, but he wanted to have it with him when the right moment came, because now there was certainty in his heart. The foundations were being built, not just for a house in Greenwich Village, but for a shared life. The family they chose to create together, united not by blood or obligation, but by something much more powerful. The conscious decision, renewed each day, to walk side by side,